The Practice Date by Victorine E. Liskey. Jane hugged her books to her chest as she walked down the sidewalk. This was it. His house was right up the street. Today she wouldn't cross to her side of the drive before reaching it. She would stride right in front of his home. As she neared, she lost her nerve to stare at the brick home with blue and white trim. Her footsteps picked up, and she pretended to be engrossed in the tiny rocks embedded in the cement. "Hey, Jane." She jumped, her heart hammering in her chest. "Oh, Lance. I didn't see you there." He hopped off the front stoop and fell into step beside her, pushing his thick glasses up his nose. "I've been waiting for you." For her? Whatever for? She hadn't spoken to Lance in forever. Ever since he started hanging out with that other crowd. "What do you want?" She didn't mean it to come out sounding so rude. "I was wondering if I could come over for a while. You know, like old times?" He stuck his hands in the pockets of his jean shorts. It was unseasonably warm for a March afternoon in Iowa. Something was up. He spent over a year ignoring her, and now without any reason he wanted to hang out at her house? Her knee-jerk reaction was to tell him off, but curiosity got the better of her. Sure. They crossed the street and Jane blushed when she walked into her split level, and her mother, staring down at them from over the banister, gave her that raised eyebrow look. "Hey, Mrs. Roberts," Lance said. "Well, hello, Lance." Her mother ran a dusting cloth over the wooden banister. "We haven't seen you around here for a while." Jane willed her mother to shut up. "I've been busy." He shuffled his feet like he always used to when he was uncomfortable. Her brother Andrew came tearing up the stairs past them. He didn't notice Lance, or if he did, he didn't care. Being 8, it was probably the latter. "We're going to hang out in the family room," Jane said, tugging on Lance. He followed her down the basement steps where she tossed her books onto the coffee table. Then she rounded on him. "What's this all about?" He maneuvered around her and plopped down on the sofa in front of the large screen TV. "It's not about anything. Can't I spend time with a friend?" Friend. The word annoyed her. He hadn't been her friend. He'd ditched her for the more popular crowd. But Lance was here, inside her house, sitting on her couch. Hadn't she been dreaming of this? Isn't this what she wanted? She swallowed her anger and sat next to him. "I guess. Do you want to play Avenger?" The mention of their old favorite video game made her smile. "Sure." She stood and opened the cabinet under the television, pulling out the game controls. She found the game and wiped the dust off the case. The last time she had played it was with Lance. When she sat back down, she could feel the heat from his leg so close to her own. He seemed distracted as they played, and she ended up beating him. He shrugged and gave her a smile which jump-started her heart. Why did she have to react that way to him? He laced his fingers behind his head and stretched out his long legs. "So, I've been thinking about prom." "Prom? No way." Jane's head felt light, and she thought she might hyperventilate. Lance was going to ask her to the prom? Even though she had been telling Colleen the prom was stupid, she had to admit that excitement rushed through her. And the thought of Lance holding her, dancing with her, she could hardly believe it. Best to play it cool. "What about prom?" she asked, hoping he didn't notice the squeak in her voice. "I'd like to ask Tiffany." The bottom dropped out of Jane's stomach, and a huge lump formed in her throat. Tiffany? The cheerleader? Sure. How could she compete with Tiffany? Tiffany the beautiful, the perky, the blonde. Her own brown hair hung drab and forgettable onto her bony shoulders. She had no cute little upturned nose like Tiffany. Everything about her was boring. Even her name Jane was plain. No wonder Lance wanted to go to the prom with Tiffany. She realized that Lance had not stopped talking. "And so I need your help." "What? Me? What are you talking about?" Lance stared at her, his eyes pleading. Tiffany's not going to agree to go out with me if I look like a computer nerd. That description fit Lance perfectly. Tall and lanky with Drew Carey glasses and dark hair slicked over to the side. Even though he'd been hanging out with Nick, the football player, he still hadn't changed his appearance much. At least he wasn't wearing a pocket protector. But you are a computer nerd. The words were out before she could take them back. Hurt shone in his eyes. Is that how you see me? Maybe it was the disappointment from not being asked to the prom or the fact that Lance had been ignoring her lately, but whatever it was, she stood and hollered, "That's how everyone sees you. You can't change who you are." She stormed out, down the hall, and into her bedroom where she slammed the door. Tears blurred her vision, her room turning into a sea of purple. How could he do that to her? He'd come back into her life just to ask her to transform him into someone Tiffany would want. Tiffany didn't need another guy falling over her, she had plenty. A knock came and she wiped her eyes, glancing in the mirror. Without makeup, it was difficult to tell she'd been crying. She blew her nose and tossed the tissue before opening the door. "I'm sorry, Jane." He stared at the floor. "I know I've been a jerk lately. But I'm going to change." His brown eyes met her gaze. "I've missed hanging around you." She didn't want to go weak in the knees, but she couldn't help it. Lance just had that effect on her. She sighed. "Please help me," he said. "You're so good at that fashion stuff." Fashion? Who did he think she was? She raised an eyebrow. "You mean because I can match my socks to my shirt?" He laughed, and Jane realized how much she had missed that sound. "Who else am I going to ask? Nick? He's about as good with fashion as I am with ballroom dancing. You're going to have to learn to dance if you want to go to the prom with Tiffany." Saying the words stabbed at her heart. Lance didn't notice. "You can help me with that, too, right?" And then it hit her. If she were teaching him to dance, he'd have to hold her. She'd be spending time with him, his arms around her, gazing into her eyes. "Okay," she heard herself say. His eyes brightened. "Really? You'll do this for me?" Was she insane? But before she could stop herself, more words came out of her mouth. "Yes, I'll help. But you'll need some money." He leaned against the door frame and stared at the floor again. "I know. How much do you think I'll need?" Jane shrugged. "I'm not sure. You'll need to get rid of those glasses, first off. Contacts are probably more than $100. And then we'll need to buy some clothes. And not from Shop Mart either. The clothes will eat up a lot of money. Haircut, and some styling gel." "I use styling gel." "I know, but you use it wrong." Lance made a face but didn't say anything, so she continued. "And you're going to need the expensive kind. I'm guessing you'll need at least $700. Maybe more." Lance ran his thumb along the door jamb. "Okay, I'll get the money." "How?" Jane was kind of hoping he would give up after hearing how much it would cost. "I've sold my Star Wars collection on eBay." "What? No way. You've been collecting that stuff for years." He kicked at the carpet. "I know. It's just, I really want this, Jane." "You want to be someone you're not?" she asked, her voice soft. His gaze once again met hers. "I'm in love with Tiffany." There was that lump in her throat again. She tried to swallow it without success. "How do you even know her?" "She and the other popular kids hang out at Nick's house because he's got a game room." Her mouth dropped. "You've been using Nick to get to Tiffany?" His eyebrows drew together. "No, it's not like that." The anger flared again. "Whatever. Sell your collection. What does it matter to me? I said I would help, and I will." Lance rushed over to her. He wrapped his arms around her, picked her up, and swung her in a circle. "I knew I could count on you." She laughed, her head dizzy from the spinning and from being so close. The familiar scent of his spicy soap mixed with the smell of him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and they stood like that for a minute as time seemed to stop. Her skin tingled where he touched her. Then the magical moment passed, and he broke away from her, almost embarrassed. "Your mom would kill me if she found me in your room." He slipped out into the hall, and Jane had no choice but to follow him. "When are you going to have the money?" He turned to face her. "I should have the money by tomorrow." The highest bid was over $1,000. A small frown crossed his face and then disappeared. She felt bad for him. He'd been so proud of the Star Wars memorabilia he'd acquired. Most of it was original stuff from the 70s. "Okay. You'll need it. Make an eye appointment. We'll go downtown and get your hair cut on Saturday." He took her hand and squeezed it. "Thanks, Janie." He bounded up the steps and she followed. "I'll see you Saturday," he called out as he left, the screen door hissing shut behind him. Saturday. Sure, he'd be going over to Nick's house to hang out with Tiffany the rest of the week. Disappointment tugged at her, but she waved it away. Maybe during the week he'd be with Tiffany, but Saturday was hers. Colleen stared at her from across the lunch table. "What is wrong with you?" She tucked a strand of her long black hair behind her ear. Everything about Colleen was dainty, from her slight figure to her delicate fingers. "You're helping the love of your life get a date with someone else. And not just anyone, Tiffany the cheerleader?" SHH. Jane waved her hand. "Quiet down." Colleen frowned and sat back in her chair. "I don't understand. Why didn't you tell him that you're in love with him and that you'd rather not be the person who makes something happen between him and little Miss Perky?" Jane glanced around to make sure no one was listening to them. "There's no way I can tell him that." Her stomach twisted in knots just thinking about it. "Well then, be prepared for misery because he's going to break your heart. Again." Colleen took an apple slice and bit it in half. Jane stared down at her pink, plastic lunch tray. "I know." She didn't feel like eating anymore, so she sat and watched the bustle of the lunchroom. "Are you done with your English essay?" Colleen asked. "Yeah. It was easy. I practically wrote it in my sleep." "You could write anything in your sleep. I swear you're going to be a famous author someday." "I wish." Jane had been writing ever since she could remember. Being a published author had always been her dream. "I loved your last blog post. I wish more people would visit it. They'd like your humor." Jane made a face. "I think the 2 hits a day are from you and my mom. I don't know why I even bother posting. You just need to be discovered." Colleen slid out of her seat and picked up her lunch tray. The bell rang. As they left the lunchroom, Colleen whispered to her, "What's Nick doing hanging out with Lance anyway? He cheating off him or something?" "Could be. I'm sure he's using him for something. Why would Lance let him do that?" Jane thought about that. Probably to be part of the popular crowd. Colleen gave her a pat on the back. "See you after school." Maneuvering around the mass of students coming at her, Jane approached her locker. Then she saw him. Lance was walking her way. She was going to pass right by him. She took a deep breath and played it cool. "Hey, Lance." "Hi, Janie." He turned and fell into step beside her. "I got an eye appointment for next week." "Great." She reached her locker. "Thanks again for, You're a real friend." "Yeah." He'd said that yesterday. Friend. Okay. What else could she say to that? He looked past her. "Well, there's Nick. I'll call you Saturday morning." He took off down the hall and she saw him walk over to the conglomeration of football jerseys and cheerleading skirts. Nick gave him a high five. "Yep. He was going to break her heart. Again. Jane flipped through the hairstyle book as Lance squirmed in the plastic chair, connecting to hers. Why are there only girls getting their hair done? This is a salon, but they cut men's hair too. Oh. His face looked a little pale. Don't stress out. I found the perfect hairstyle for you. Jane held up the book and pointed to a photo. Lance wrinkled his nose. He looks like he just got out of bed. I know. The messy hair is popular right now. A chair opened up and the stylist motioned for Lance to sit. Jane showed her the photo. Can you make his hair do this? Sure thing, hon. She draped a cape around him, leaned the chair back and stuck his head in the sink. After the shampoo and rinse, she had him moved to another chair. Soon tufts of dark hair covered the tile floor. Then the beautician squirted some mint green goop into her palm and worked it through his hair. The transformation was amazing. Jane had always thought Lance was cute, but this made him gorgeous. How do I look? He asked, raising an eyebrow. For a moment she couldn't speak. Finally, she said, good. Real good. Next up, the mall. Jane hopped into Lance's blue Taurus, and he pulled out of the parking lot. It was hard not to stare at him. Shopping for clothes was uneventful. They spent the afternoon flipping through racks, trying them on, and picking out the ones that looked the trendiest. At first Jane had no clue what she was doing, but by the end of the afternoon she felt confident that together they had picked some decent pieces. And they were having a sale, so it didn't eat up as much money as she had thought, the most expensive item being a $200 black leather jacket. After paying for the clothes and carrying bags out to the car, Lance turned to her. Let's go out to dinner. My treat. In all the time they had spent together, Lance had never taken her on what she would consider a date. They did things together as kids, rollerblading, going to a movie, but always with an adult around. By the time they were dating age, Lance had stopped hanging out with her. Now that she was 16 and he was 17, she definitely considered this a date. Her heart dropped into her stomach. I'd love to. I've got cash. We can go anywhere you want. You hungry for anything in particular? She hesitated. Yes, but it will sound stupid. Curiosity crossed his face. Try me. I'm in the mood for a hamburger. Is that dumb? He laughed. Not dumb at all. I know the perfect place. He started the car and Jane sent a text to her mom letting her know she'd be out for dinner. 10 minutes later, Lance pulled into a parking lot next to a small restaurant with red and white checkered trim. The sign said Stuff a Burger. I've never been here before. Lance grinned as he shut off the engine. These are the most amazing burgers. The toppings are stuffed inside the meat. They're delicious. Interesting. You'll love it. Hey, I should come open your car door for you. With that, he hopped out and ran round the car. Jane was flattered that Lance would do something so chivalrous. Lance took her hand and helped her out of the car, making her heart beat faster. Tiffany is going to love that, right? Her spirits fell to the ground and pooled in a puddle at her feet. She turned away from him so he wouldn't see the hurt on her face. Yeah. She'll love that. The burger place was the seat-yourself kind, so they chose a small round table by the window. A girl in a white shirt and red apron appeared and handed them menus. I'll give you a second to look, she said. Jane scanned the menu. Ooh, the Swiss cheese and mushroom burger sounds good. I'm going to have the peanut butter burger. Jane wrinkled her nose. Peanut butter? Sounds gross, right? But it's to die for. His brown eyes sparkled. Now you've got me intrigued. She laughed. You'll have to give me a bite. You got it. After they ordered and the menus were taken away, Lance leaned back in his chair. He tapped the table with one hand. What's on your mind? Nothing, really. I'm just thinking about what I would say to Tiffany on a date like this. Of course, I couldn't bring her here, Lance said. I'd take her somewhere with tablecloths. You're not really a tablecloth kind of guy. Lance frowned. That's not what matters. Jane wanted to rebuttal but held her tongue. The last thing she wanted to do was drive a wedge between them. Well, you could ask her what kind of things she likes. Be interested in her. Girls like it when guys are interested in what they have to say. Lance pointed at her and nodded. You're brilliant. Tell that to my geometry teacher. A look of concern crossed his face. You having trouble in geometry? I can help you with that. She had been joking, but the thought of spending more time with Lance gave her flutters in her belly. Thanks. I'd love that. The waitress brought their food and Jane took a tentative bite. The cheese and mushrooms almost melted in her mouth. Wow, she said after chewing and swallowing. You're not kidding. This is delicious. Here, he said, handing his burger over. Try the peanut butter. Surprisingly, she liked that one too. It reminded her of the way the cashew chicken at the Chinese place tasted with the meat and nut flavors together. Good. Lance looked like he'd just won the lottery. I told you you'd like it. A comfortable silence swept in as they ate. When they left, Lance held the door for her. She tried not to think about how he was practicing for Tiffany. As he drove her home, she gathered up her nerve. Do you want to come over tomorrow to get your first dance lesson? Can't. I've got plans tomorrow. But how about next weekend? Maybe Friday night? Plans. Sure. She could guess what that meant. Whatever. Okay. She tried not to let the disappointment creep into her voice. When he dropped her off at her house, he said, we should hang out more often. It was fun today. Before she could say anything, he walked away, got in his car, and left. Yeah, it was, she said to herself. The week seemed to drag on as Jane went through the motions of going to class and doing her homework. Her only relief was when she sat down at her computer to write. The book she was working on was a comedy, but she felt the urge to introduce a new character, a love interest. Maybe she could make it a romantic comedy. She heard a soft knock at her door, and her mother poked her head in. I just took a batch of chocolate chip cookies from the oven. Would you like some? Jane smiled at her mother. I never refuse cookies. Her mother came in and set a plate down on the desk next to Jane. Are you working on your book? Yep. She stole a glance at her mom. Her soft brown curls framed her face in such a nice way. Her mother had always permed her hair, ever since she could remember. Jane thought it made her look younger. Did I ever tell you I used to write? Jane's mouth popped open. No. What did you write? Her mother smiled. Just some short stories. Do you still have any? No, I think they got lost over the years. A little disappointment tugged Jane. Darn. I would have liked to read them. Her mother laughed. They weren't very good. But you're right, I should have kept better track of them. Jane expected her mother to leave, but instead she sat down on the bed. Are you and Lance dating now? Jane swiveled around in her computer chair to study her mother. No, not really. We're just friends. Saying that hurt more than she wanted to admit. Her mother smoothed the bedspread. You like him, don't you? Great. Was she that obvious? How pathetic. I guess. Don't be afraid to tell Lance how you feel. Yeah, that was easier said than done. She stared down at her shoes. I can't. He likes someone else. Her mother nodded. I see. That's got to be hard on you. Jane shrugged. What could she do about it? A smile appeared on her mother's face, and she stood. Don't worry. Things like this have a way of working out. Thanks. What did she mean by that? Jane, are you even listening? Colleen grabbed her arm and gave it a shake. Huh? Jane focused her attention on Colleen, feeling a bit guilty for ignoring her. She'd been looking down the hall for Lance. He usually came this way right about now. Colleen gave her a disapproving look. Stop this, before you get too hurt. Tell him you can't see him tomorrow. Make up some excuse. No way. She'd been waiting all week for Friday night. Colleen was worrying over nothing. I can't. I promised him I'd help. Then unpromise. Colleen's dark eyes pleaded with her. You're my best friend. I know you're only looking out for me. But I can handle this. She saw Lance out of the corner of her eye and froze. He'd gotten contacts. Holy cow. Why had she convinced him to do that? Now every girl in the school was going to be falling all over him. Colleen turned to look at what Jane was staring at. Is that Lance? Dang, girl. You're a miracle worker. Jane shook her head. No. It's been there all along. She heard a sigh come from Colleen. All right. I can see nothing I say is going to make a difference. She turned her attention back to her friend. I'm sorry. You're probably right. It's just that he's spending time with me again. I've missed that. I know. Colleen pulled a notebook from her locker and slammed it shut. Call me later. Deal. Jane couldn't concentrate at school. This was it. Tonight, she was supposed to teach Lance how to dance. The thought of her teaching anyone to dance was kind of funny. She'd only been to a couple of dances, and they should have been called sits because that's what she and Colleen had done. Sit in chairs on the sidelines. But they watched the other couples, and it didn't seem too hard. After school, Lance came up to her locker. Hey, do you want a ride home? Sure, she said, a bit breathless. If only her heart would slow down, she might sound more normal. She slung her book bag over her shoulder and shut her locker. I can carry that for you. It's not heavy. Lance frowned. I thought girls liked that stuff. Oh. Right. He's practicing. She handed it over. All right then. Her nerves jumped as he drove to her house. When they entered the basement, Jane was glad to see her little brother wasn't around. Lance took off his jacket and tossed it on the couch. She went into her bedroom to get her Bluetooth speaker. When she came back, Lance pointed to her backpack. Do you have any geometry homework? I could help you with it if you want. I do, actually. I'd love some help. Anything to keep him here longer. He plopped down on the sofa, and she dug her homework out of her bag and handed it to him. He thumbed through her book. What chapter are you on? 17. We're studying surface area and volume. Lance patted the sofa beside him. Have a seat. This isn't that hard. She sat beside him and pretended not to understand the material while listening to the baritone of his voice as he explained how to calculate the volume of a cone. He had a nice voice. And his breath smelled good, too, like he'd been eating peppermints. Maybe he'd snuck a breath mint. The thought made her smile. She stared at the open book and stole glances at his face whenever she could. A tiny bit of stubble grew on his jawline. She had the urge to touch it but refrained. Do you think you've got it now? She nodded. Yes. The way you explain it makes sense. A bright smile filled his face. Good. I'm glad to help. Any questions? I do have a question, she said tentatively. But it's not about homework. His eyebrows lifted a bit. Sure, what is it? How did you get to be friends with Nick? Jane searched his face, looking for any sign that she had offended him. He closed his eyes and nodded, placed the geometry book on the coffee table, then leaned forward and put his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. After a minute he spoke. At the beginning of last year my mother got sick. She was in the hospital for a while. A horrible feeling overcame her. She'd been mad that he had stopped coming over to her house, and he'd been dealing with something like this. She felt terrible. Lance, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. Is she okay? He took a deep breath and nodded. Yeah, I think so. Sometimes she hits a rough patch and has to go back in. Is it cancer? She asked, afraid of the answer. Lance stared at his shoes. No. Jane knew it was something bad by the way he sat there, not saying anything. She patted his back, trying to give him support. He raked his hand through his hair. She tried to kill herself, Janie, he said softly. Her throat constricted and she didn't know what to say. She had known Lance's mom for years. She'd always seemed just fine. I'm so sorry, she repeated. I came home from school one day and she was in the garage with the car running. She'd written a suicide note, and she had passed out in the driver's seat. I was so scared. I thought she was dead. A tear slid down his cheek and he continued to stare at his feet. How awful. Her throat closed up and she felt her own eyes fill with tears. She spent the next few weeks in the psych ward at the hospital. My dad and I would go visit her every day. Once when I was coming out of her room I ran into Nick. I'd been crying and was embarrassed to see someone from school there. He stopped and talked to me in the hall. His aunt had been struggling with depression for years. That's why he was there. His aunt was in the psych ward too. He didn't make fun of me for bawling or anything. He understood what I was going through. Again, Jane was lost for words. She'd totally misjudged Nick. This was the last thing she thought she would hear. Lance wiped his cheek, but still wouldn't look at her. Nick started inviting me over and asking me to eat lunch with him. He never told anyone else at school. She put her arm around him and placed her head on his shoulder. Sounds like Nick's a good friend. He took her hand and squeezed it. And so are you. A good friend. Right. She'd been jumping to all the wrong conclusions about Lance and Nick. Guilt spread through her. After all the time she'd spent with Lance, she should have known better. Why didn't you ever tell me? She asked quietly. I guess I was embarrassed. I didn't want anyone to know. But I was wrong. I should have told you. I'm sorry for shutting you out. He turned to face her, his dark eyes penetrating through her. I promise not to shut you out again. She touched his face, fulfilling her desire to feel the stubble on his cheek. You'd better not. He grinned and the mood lightened. I think another round of Avenger is called for. You got it. They ended up playing Avenger until the sky darkened outside and they'd both won 3 rounds. Jane tossed her controller down on the seat. Okay, am I going to teach you some dance moves or what? Lance squirmed. One more game? A tiebreaker? She squinted at him. What's up? Are you nervous about dancing? Maybe. Why? He fiddled with his fingers. I guess if I find out I stink, my whole plan of taking Tiffany to the prom is shot. Jane poked him in the side. Come on, get off your lazy butt. You won't stink. She pushed the coffee table over to the wall to give them a little space. Then she turned on the speaker and pulled her phone out of her pocket. Let's start with fast dancing. She found an upbeat song and pushed play. Now, most of the kids just move around like this. She bent her knees, moved her arms to the beat and showed Lance how to mimic her moves. That's it? There's no twirling or dipping or anything? Jane laughed. None. Great. I think I can do this. They danced to 2 more songs before Jane got up the nerve to suggest they learn slow dancing. "Okay, I think I'm ready," he said. "Bring it on." Jane scrolled through her song list and found something slow. "True" by Ryan Cabrera. It was an old song, but she liked the lyrics. She pushed play and the first strains of a guitar began. "Okay, put your hands on my waist." Lance did as he was told. Being this close to him made her feel all nervous and awkward. She took a breath, reached up and put her hands on his shoulders. "Now, all you do is take a step to the side, and then back again, swaying in time to the music." Lance took a step, stopped, and then repeated in the other direction. "Like that? I think you're supposed to glide more." He chuckled. "I'm a guy. Guys don't glide. They do when they want to woo the women with their smooth dancing. Now come on, like this." She guided him back and forth in a small circle. "That's not too hard," he said, smiling down at her. "I think I'm getting the hang of this." "Okay, now you lead." He applied a gentle pressure on her waist. His touch sent shivers up her back. "Like this? Perfect." After a minute, she laid her head on his shoulder, snuggling up to his neck, and noted how appropriate the lyrics to the song were. She had waited all her life for him. And now his heart had gone to someone else. She pushed that thought out of her mind. Tiffany wasn't here dancing with him. She was. The future didn't exist right now. Lance was holding her, and she felt like she could do anything. And then the song ended. Lance stopped moving. "Janie?" His voice cracked. "MMM? I think the song's done," he said quietly. She took her head off his shoulder and looked up into his deep brown eyes. "Oh, sorry. I didn't notice." A total lie. Of course, she'd noticed. Lance didn't say anything, he just peered down at her. His face bent slowly toward her. Her heart did this funny beating thing, and she couldn't breathe. She didn't realize that she had moved closer to him until their lips were touching, but by that time it was too late. She stood there, frozen, her lips touching his, for what seemed like forever. Wasn't she supposed to do something? Maybe move her lips? Touch his hair? She didn't know. This was the first time she had kissed a boy. Lance pulled away, his cheeks flushed. From the heat flaming her face, she could tell her cheeks were red too. A little voice in the back of her mind screamed at her. "Say something. Anything. Fix this before he gets scared off." Sorry, I just thought you should practice that too, for when you're on your date with Tiffany." "Tiffany. Right." Lance let go of her. He backed up and ran into the coffee table, almost falling but catching himself. "We should." He grabbed his jacket off the couch. "Practice, I mean." He started toward the stairs. "Where are you going?" "I have to go now." "I mean, it's late, but we should practice more." "Tomorrow." He took several steps before Jane became unfrozen from her place. She followed him to the bottom of the stairs. "Tomorrow," she called up after him. "Yes, I'll see you tomorrow." He tossed her a half-hearted wave and slipped out of the front door. Jane lay in her bed unable to sleep. She'd kissed Lance and he'd run out of her house. So much for fairy tale endings. He'd practically climbed out of his skin. Was she that horrible to kiss? At least he was coming over tomorrow. She might be able to redeem herself. Somehow. She picked up her cell phone and called Colleen. "Hello?" Jane sucked in a breath. "Don't hate me." "What? Why? What happened with Lance?" Jane closed her eyes. "I kissed him." "No way. You kissed him? What did he do?" She was afraid Colleen would ask her that. I don't know." "You don't know? What do you mean you don't know?" Colleen's voice was getting louder. Well, he sort of freaked out a little bit. Dead silence. Colleen? Freaked out how? Colleen asked, carefully. He tripped over the coffee table and then left really quickly. I think I scared him, she confessed. Colleen let out a breath. What kind of a kiss was it? Like a little peck? No. It was kind of a bit longer than that. Did he look mad? Jane thought about that. He didn't really look angry. No. Shocked maybe. Well then, that's not all bad. Maybe he liked it. Jane remembered the way Lance had run up the steps. She didn't think so. But Colleen sounded hopeful, and she didn't want to ruin that. Maybe. Oops, my mom is waving at me to get off the phone. I'll talk with you later. Okay. Bye. Jane hung up and plugged her cell phone in the charger. She'd better get some sleep. Lance had said he'd be coming over again tomorrow. She slid under the covers and switched off the light. Still not tired. After tossing and turning for a while, sleep finally came. When she woke, the sun was up. She was out of bed before her little brother, which was saying something. She ate a bowl of Lucky Charms before she got dressed. Jeans and a sweater. The weather had turned cool again. She stared at herself in the mirror. Maybe a little makeup would help. A bit of eyeliner and some mascara didn't seem to make a difference. Still plain Jane. She slid onto the couch and flipped on the television. Scanning through the channels, she finally settled on an old Lindsay Lohan movie. Before long, Andrew came down the stairs in his worn Superman pajamas that were a size too small for him. Hey, I was going to watch TV. Maybe it was the way he whined at her, or the fact that she didn't know what to expect with Lance today, but whatever it was, annoyance got the better of her. Who's stopping you? Andrew screwed up his face in disgust. I don't want to watch some girly show. Then go away. Even to her own ears, the words sounded mean. She was about to say she was sorry when Andrew hollered. Mom! Settle down, dork. You can watch whatever you want. She tossed the remote on the seat and went into her room. A twinge of guilt surged for picking a fight with Andrew, but she didn't go back and smooth things over. Instead, she popped in her wireless earbuds and turned up the volume on her phone. She hopped onto her bed and lay on her stomach, putting her chin on her fist, listening to the Ryan Cabrera song on repeat. She must have dozed off, because she awoke to Andrew shaking her shoulder. Jane, wake up. She pulled her earbuds out. What? Lance is here. Oh, thanks. She stood, and then turned to Andrew. Sorry about calling you a dork earlier. He eyed her suspiciously. Okay. When she walked into the family room, Lance stood. Hey, Jane. He was wearing an outfit they had picked out at the mall, an expensive pair of jeans, a two-layered shirt that looked like someone had slashed a knife across it several times, and the black leather jacket. Hi. Lance shifted his weight. I was thinking we could go out today. You up for it? Where do you want to go? Lance got a funny look on his face, but she couldn't read it. I thought maybe you'd help me practice my dating etiquette. You know, for Tiffany. Right. Of course, he would want to make sure he was acting perfect for Tiffany. She felt like slapping him upside the head, but instead she plastered a smile on her face. At least she could spend time with him. Sure. He took her hand and warmth spread up her arm. Come on, I've got a great day planned. Jane glanced out the car window at the mall. More shopping? Nope. His grin was contagious. Jane found herself forgetting about Tiffany and enjoying the moment. Lance opened her door for her and held her hand as they walked to the entrance. She could get used to this hand-holding thing. Her heart did this little excited jumpy dance. They walked through the mall and Lance stopped in front of the Glow Golf Center. You do still like miniature golf, don't you? I love it. And I've always wanted to come here. He opened the glass door and they walked into the dark entrance. Black lights hung low from the ceiling, giving their skin a strange ghostly appearance. Neon green and blue stripes on the floor illuminated the path to the front desk. There weren't too many people golfing, so they were able to get right on the course. The floor looked like a crazy glowing maze, with several moving obstacles for golfers to putt through. Lance handed her a purple ball that glowed under the black lights. Your favorite color. Thanks. Lance swept his arm out. Ladies first. She put the ball on the mark and practiced her aim. On the third swing, she let the club connect with the ball and it rolled, bounced off the wall and continued until it was 2 inches from the hole. Lance made a whistling noise. You're going to be hard to beat. You'd better believe it. They continued taking turns around the course. Every once in a while, Lance would touch her arm or glance at her in a way that would make her knees weak. On the 9th hole, she made a particularly difficult shot and got a hole-in-one. Lance let out a whoop, picked her up and twirled her in a circle. After he set her back down, he didn't let go. Nice one, he said, then gave her a quick peck on the lips. Her mouth fell open. Did that just happen? He leaned close. Don't look so shocked. You're the one that said I needed practice, he whispered, his breath tickling her cheek. Oh. Right. Tiffany. Disappointment crashed down on her. She had a sudden urge to hurt him. And you do. That was pathetic. But it wasn't hurt that shone in his eyes, it was amusement. Too quick. Yes. You need to give a girl time to savor the moment. He cupped the sides of her face with his hands and tilted her chin up. You mean, like this? His lips brushed hers, sending shivers through her. Then his lips were moving against hers, warm and soft. She returned the kiss, closing her eyes and getting lost in the sensations. Wow, where had he learned to kiss like that? She felt like she was hooked up to an electrical wire. He made her feel things she'd never felt before. When they broke apart, a wide smile spread across Lance's face. Any better? Jane didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. If he improved any more, she'd have to ask him to drive her to the hospital. She was surprised her legs still worked when he tugged her over a small bridge to the next part of the course. She tried her best to get another hole-in-one but was unsuccessful. She did end up beating him, though. You'd think a girl would go easy on a guy, he said playfully. What if my manly pride was hurt? Then you're not the guy for me. Jane handed her club to the kid behind the counter. Lance's face grew serious. Who is the guy for you? What kind of a question was that? She peered at him, trying to figure out what his game was. His face didn't reveal anything. She felt like saying, you are, you dork, but you're in love with someone else, but somehow she didn't think that would be a good idea. Finally, she decided to play dumb. I'll let you know when I find him. They left the golf place and stepped into the brightness of the mall. Lance's hand once again found hers. It felt comfortable, like slipping into an old pair of shoes. If only he knew what he was doing to her heart. You hungry? The mention of food made her mouth water. Yes. Do you want to eat in the food court here, or go somewhere else? The smells from the food court converted her. Let's eat here. They chose the Chinese place and joined the end of the line. Lance rubbed the side of her hand with his thumb, almost absent-mindedly, which made it hard to think. How are you going to ask Tiffany to the prom? She asked, and then mentally kicked herself. Why did she say that? What was wrong with her? Tiffany was the last person she wanted Lance to think about. He raised an eyebrow. I don't know, he said slowly. Don't most guys just ask? Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. It didn't work. The words kept coming. No. You can't blurt it out. You have to find a creative way to ask her. He appeared thoughtful. Like how? It was too late. She had to keep talking now. Last year, Sheila got a dozen roses delivered to her house with a note asking her to prom. That's sweet. And Aaron stood outside of Jessica's window, holding up a boombox like in that one movie. A smile tugged at his lips. Then there's Tammy, who got a puzzle mailed to her, one piece at a time. He laughed. I think I'm getting the picture. Good. Because if you want her to say yes, you'll want to be smooth about it. Why was her mouth still moving? Lance nodded and stuffed his free hand into his jacket pocket, rocking back on his heels. How do you think I should ask her? Super. Now he's asking her advice on it. I think a girl like Tiffany would be impressed with flowers. Simple, but nice. He studied her face. What about you? If a guy were to ask you to prom, what would impress you? Me? The question surprised her, and she was caught off guard. I don't know. Something private. I wouldn't like a billboard or anything embarrassing. And I'm not really a flower kind of girl. Well, he said, rubbing his chin. I don't envy the guy who wants to ask you to prom. A chuckle bubbled up. The thought of anyone wanting to take her to prom was absurd. Yeah. Poor guy. They ordered their food and wandered through the crowd to find a table. She set her tray down and slid into the chair. I love sweet and sour pork. Lance suppressed a smile, and she wondered what that was about. When they were done eating, Lance slid a fortune cookie to her. Okay, time to find out your fortune. My favorite part of eating Chinese. She cracked open the cookie and slid the paper out. Expect the unexpected. She flipped the paper over. Blank. That's it? What a dumb fortune. How can someone expect the unexpected? That's why it's unexpected. She tossed it on the table in disgust. Lance's shoulders shook with laughter. What? She popped a piece of fortune cookie in her mouth. He waved his hand. Nothing. You just crack me up. He took the wadded up napkins and tossed them onto his tray. You ready to go? Yep. Where are we going now? Lance slid her tray under his and took them to the trash. Then he took her hand again, sending goose pimples up her arm. You'll see. They left the mall, the cool air feeling good on her warm face. Lance opened the car door for her again. You're getting good at this gentleman thing. Thanks. Jane watched him walk around the car to the driver's side. The clothes they bought looked good on him. A little too good, in fact. She turned away. She didn't look at him again until they pulled in front of a building with a sign that said Pottery Palace. What's this? He grinned and his eyes shone. Let's go in, I think you'll like it. When they entered, Jane could smell the earthy scent of baking clay. Shelving lined the entire right wall, filled with a large assortment of clay pots, vases, mugs, figurines and plates, all light gray. The rest of the room was filled with square tables where people were painting pottery. A woman wearing a blue apron came up to them. Welcome to Pottery Palace. Have you been here before? No, we haven't, Lance said. Well, here are the pottery pieces. Choose which one you'd like to paint. The prices are on the shelf. You can take it to any table you'd like. The different colored glazes are on the other wall, just take what you'd like. We've also got sponges, stencils and foam stamps. When you're done, set it on that back table. We'll fire it for you. You'll have to come back to get it, but we usually have them done in a few days. Any questions? Lance shook his head and then looked at Jane. No, she examined the large wall of pottery. Wow, this is cool. How did you know about this place? I'm a computer nerd, remember? I'm a master Googler. Jane smiled and picked out a decorative plate. It was heavier than it looked. This is what I want to paint. I think I'll do a mug. They picked out some glaze and sat down. Jane studied Lance's face. Why did he bring her here? It wasn't like Tiffany would be into something crafty like this. She looked like the type that would be more into doing her nails and gossiping. Lance caught her staring at him. What? Just wondering, why pottery? It's not like Tiffany would be impressed with this place. Lance shrugged and stared at his mug for a minute before lifting his gaze to meet hers. I'm practicing on you, aren't I? Yeah, I guess. Painting the clay was relaxing to Jane. There was something soothing about swirling the brush into the glaze and gliding it over the surface of the pottery. When she glanced up, she saw Lance concentrating so hard that the tip of his tongue stuck out. She giggled. A bit of pink flushed his cheeks. I'm creating a masterpiece. What are you painting? His mug was black with a few gray blobs on it. This is the Death Star, and here are some X-Wing fighters. A pang of sadness tugged at her. Starting your Star Wars collection again? Not really. Just thought it would be fun. What about you? What are you doing? She looked down at hers. I guess I'm just going with my mood. Muted purple, blue and yellow flourishes filled the plate. They would come out bright after they were fired. I like it. This pleased her for some reason. Thanks. They finished and took their pottery to the back table. They were given tickets for claiming their pieces later in the week. Lance paid for the pottery and then held the door for her. The sun had gone down and the chilly night air went right through her sweater. She rubbed her arms. Lance slid his jacket off. Here, put this on. No, you'll freeze. He put the jacket on her shoulders anyway. Come on, you're not making it easy for me to practice being the gentleman here. She wanted to tell him he was doing just fine and probably didn't need any more practice, but that would have been stupid. She was enjoying the time with him. So, she slipped her arms into his jacket and breathed in the smell of him mixed with the leather. Lance drove to her house and pulled into the driveway. Her heart pounded against her rib cage. This was the end of the date. Her mouth went dry as he opened her car door and held out his hand for her. They walked up the steps and then he turned to her. Thank you for going out with me today. I had a wonderful time. Did he mean it, or was he still practicing what he would say to Tiffany? She wasn't sure, but she felt like she had to say something. I did too. Do you want to go out again? Next weekend? Heck yes. She mentally calmed herself. Okay. He brushed the back of his fingers across her cheek. His other hand reached around her waist and pulled her close. This was it. He was going to kiss her again. She closed her eyes and felt his lips on hers. The kiss took her breath away. He'd definitely perfected how to do it. She didn't want to think about why. Good night, he whispered, and then he was gone. She opened her eyes to watch him get into his car and drive away. Jane opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling as the morning light streamed in her window. Next weekend. How could she wait a whole week to see Lance again? Her stomach felt heavy. Of course, she'd see him at school, but just in passing. That wouldn't cut it anymore. Not after yesterday. She missed the warmth of his hand, the sound of his voice, and the way his eyes sparkled when he smiled. Maybe she could call him and ask for more help with her geometry. Then she saw his black leather jacket hanging on the back of her computer chair. Perfect. She could walk over to his house with the excuse that she was returning his jacket. She got dressed, scarfed down some breakfast, and hollered to her mother that she'd be back later. The short walk to Lance's house seemed to take forever. Maybe it was because her steps got progressively slower as she approached. What if he wasn't home? What if he was home but didn't invite her in? She stood in front of his house clutching the jacket. Time for a deep breath. Just do it. She stepped up the stairs and pressed the doorbell. She heard movement from inside the house. Then Lance opened the door. He grinned when he saw her. "Hey, Janie." There it was. That smile. She could die happy now. She held up his jacket. "I forgot to give this back to you yesterday." "Oh. Thanks." The moment turned awkward as he stared at her standing on his stoop. Then he did a quick glance behind him. "Do you want to come in?" "Sure." When she stepped into the house, Lance's father looked up from the Sunday morning paper he was reading in his easy chair. "Hi, Jane." "Hello." There was no sign of his mother anywhere. Lance hung up his jacket, then put his hand on her back. "Do you want to watch TV or something?" "That sounds good to me." He could ask her if she wanted to walk on nails, and she'd agree as long as she was with him. They walked down the hall to the family room. Lance turned to her. "My mom isn't feeling too well," he whispered. "I'm sorry." She twisted her hands. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," he said quickly. "I just wanted to give you a heads up. She'll probably spend the day in bed." They sat down and Lance picked up the remote control. "Did you get your geometry homework done?" "Yes." A small smile snuck onto his face. "Good." He clicked through the channels until they found a Monk marathon. They used to watch Monk together, and it reminded her of old times. Jane picked a piece of invisible lint from her jeans. "Is your mom going to be okay?" Lance's face grew serious. "I don't know." A helpless feeling overcame her. "Isn't there medication she can take?" "She's been on several different kinds. They help, I think. But she still struggles. She's not the same person she was." His voice was quiet, even though they were on the opposite end of the house from his mother's room. "I wish there was something we could do." He put his arm around her and pulled her close. "Me too." He kissed the top of her head. She leaned into him, and they spent the rest of the afternoon curled up on the sofa. Monday came and Jane dragged herself out of bed. Another week of school and seeing Lance hanging out with Nick and Tiffany. She wasn't looking forward to it. But when she approached her locker, she saw Lance leaning up against it. He smiled and her stomach did that fluttering thing again. "Hi," he said, moving out of her way so she could open it. "What's up?" she asked, sliding her book bag into her locker. He shrugged. "Nothing. Just thought I would walk you to class." She squinted up at him. "Why?" He scanned the hallway as if he didn't know what to say. Then he grinned. "Practice." "Right." She rolled her eyes but made sure he didn't see. "Fine." She pulled a notebook out of her bag and slammed her locker. She started down the hall, making him catch up to her. When he put his arm around her, she stopped short. "What are you doing?" He looked exasperated. "Walking you to class." "Aren't you afraid Tiffany is going to see us?" He leaned down and whispered in her ear. "Maybe she'll be jealous." A lump formed in her throat. Now he was using her to make Tiffany jealous. She wanted to tell him to get lost, to never talk to her again, but a much bigger part of her couldn't do that. Especially not after what he told her this weekend. So she forced herself to smile. "You're right. That's a good idea. Make her jealous." They walked down the hallway, getting a few looks from some of the students. When they got to her biology class, he took her hand. She could see Colleen in her desk staring at them. "See you later." He leaned down and gave her a quick kiss on the lips. Before she could react, he slipped down the hall and joined the throng of students. As she walked to her desk, Colleen's eyes widened. "Are you and Lance a thing now?" Dazed, all she could do was shake her head. "No? You sure looked like a thing." Jane slid into her chair. "He wants to make Tiffany jealous." Colleen's face turned red, and she frowned. "I can't believe you would let him do that." "Let him do what?" Kiss me? You think I don't want him to kiss me? Of course, you do. But don't you want him kissing you for you, and not because of some other girl? The room felt hot, and Jane closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. I know. I do want that. It's just. She heard Colleen sigh. You want to be near him. I get it. I'll totally shut up about it. I know I'm being stupid and that I'll regret it later. Probably. Colleen put her hand on Jane's shoulder. But for now, oh, man, is he a good kisser? The bell rang and Colleen whispered, tell me later. The rest of the week sped by with Lance doing his best to make Tiffany jealous and totally destroying Jane's heart in the process. By Friday afternoon, she was ready to give up. She couldn't take much more. Lance strode to her locker. Do you want to go out for dinner with me tonight? Maybe try out that new Chinese place? Don't look at him. Don't look at him. Too late. She looked. His brown eyes stopped her heart. Okay, she said. Why was she continuing to torture herself? Great, he said, grinning. It should be fun. Yeah. Fun. Lance didn't notice her despondent mood. He put his arm around her shoulders. I'll pick you up at 6, okay? I've got something I need to do first. Sure. He dropped her off at her house and sped away. While she watched him leave, she wondered what she was doing. At some point he would stop this charade and go after Tiffany. Maybe Tiffany would reject him. The thought gave her a little comfort. She decided to change out of her jeans. She chose a cute black skirt and some layered shirts. She put her hair up, thinking that might be a nice change. Then she put on a dab of perfume and a little makeup. She frowned at herself in the mirror. Not a great improvement. At least she didn't have any zits today. She went upstairs to watch for Lance out of the living room window. Andrew wandered over to her. Are you leaving? Yes. Andrew stared at her, his face contemplative. You smell good. She left. Thanks, Drewby. Right at 6, Lance pulled up and hopped out of his car. She met him at the door. Andrew started chanting, Lance and Janie sitting in a tree. Heat rose to her face, and she rushed out, urging Lance down the steps. He chuckled. Andrew must have been watching out the window when I brought you home last week. I guess. She noticed he'd changed his clothes too. He was wearing khaki pants and a hunter green sweater. It looked good on him, and she tried not to stare. When they entered the restaurant, the smell of soy and ginger made her mouth water. Lighted paper lanterns hung from the ceiling and a gold bas relief dragon filled almost one entire wall. The hostess showed them to a table and handed them menus. Lance leaned over the table and said, You look fantastic tonight. Fantastic? Her? He had to be thinking about what he would say to Tiffany on prom night. Thanks, she said, a hole opening up in her chest. This was no longer fun. They ordered their food and made small talk while they waited. By the time her soup arrived, she was starving. The hot and sour tasted perfect. This is delicious. Lance beamed. I thought you'd like this place. He looked so happy. They ate their meals in silence. Lance kept glancing around the restaurant, and Jane wondered what was up with that. Was he expecting someone? Just as she pushed back her empty dish, the waiter stopped at their table and set a plate down in front of her. It had a fortune cookie on it. Then he did this little bow thing, winked at Lance, and took off. She looked up at Lance, slightly confused. You ordered me a fortune cookie? A smile spread across his face. I did. Do they usually bring it out on a plate? He shrugged. I dunno. Open it. She pulled open the cookie and slid out the slip of paper. Will you go to the prom with me? She read. Her heart lodged in her throat. Lance was going to ask Tiffany to the prom this way. Perfect. She'll love that, she said, her voice cracking. That was it. She couldn't do this anymore. Tears filled her eyes and she stood. I can't, no more words would come. She ran out of the restaurant. Tears streaming down her face, she continued to walk down the sidewalk. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't be around Lance anymore. But of course, she heard footsteps behind her and then Lance put his hand on her shoulder. Janie, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. She turned to face him. I just can't do this anymore. The last thing I wanted to do was make you cry. He stuffed his fists into his pockets and looked down at his feet. I thought maybe you wouldn't mind going to the prom with me. I didn't think it would upset you so much. Jane stared at him. Wait, what? I thought you wanted to go to the prom with Tiffany. His eyes met hers. I did, at first. You said you were in love with her. Why are you so mad? She shoved his chest, but he didn't budge. Because I thought you were practicing. I know. His face fell. That's my fault. I was afraid to tell you I had changed my mind. I was enjoying spending time with you. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly to calm down. So, you let me believe you were thinking of Tiffany while we were on our dates, while you danced with me, and kissed me? His cheeks turned pink. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have kissed you. I wanted you to kiss me, she said quietly. Confusion hit his face. You did? Then why are you so upset that I asked you to prom? I thought you were going to ask Tiffany this way, with the fortune cookie and everything. I didn't want to be your practice girl anymore. I wanted you to be with me. He smiled and stepped forward, reaching out to her and taking her hand. Does that mean you will go to prom with me? Yes, you dork, I'll go to the prom with you. He pulled her close and she laid her head on his shoulder. I guess I messed this whole asking you to prom thing up, he said. She laughed. Other than making me believe you were trying out your moves on me for Tiffany, you were perfect. I loved the fortune cookie. I'm sad I didn't get to eat it. A deep chuckle came from his chest. I'm glad you didn't eat it. Why? I couldn't figure out how to get my own fortune in it, so I cracked one open, replaced the note, and then superglued it. Jane sat in front of the mirror in her room. The dress she had picked out felt silky and smooth next to her skin. Red. She felt daring wearing a red dress to prom. Her mother pulled her hair into a French knot and fastened it. It actually looked good with her light makeup and lipstick. You look beautiful. Thanks, Mom. She stood and gave her mother a hug. She feared she'd been taking her mother for granted, especially after learning about the health issues Lance's mom was going through. Have I told you lately how much I love you? Her mother got a surprised look on her face and then smiled. I'm sure you have. Good. Because you deserve to hear it every day. Lance showed up wearing a black tux with a red rose pinned to his lapel. He looked fantastic. He held out a clear box with a wrist corsage for her. A matching red rose. It's beautiful, she said, wondering for a small moment if she were dreaming. Then they were forced to pose while Jane's mom and dad took pictures. She had to admit she didn't mind it so much. When she stepped outside, she gasped. A long, black limousine sat in front of her house. Lance, this must have cost a fortune. He shrugged. I had a few extra dollars lying around. Of course, his Star Wars collection. Don't you feel bad about selling your collection now? Lance slipped his arm around her and pulled her close. Not at all. It was worth it. Her heart raced. The limousine pulled up in front of a nice restaurant and again Jane was surprised. You're still not a tablecloth kind of guy. That doesn't matter, he said, chuckling. I thought maybe you'd take me to stuff a burger. His smile crinkled the skin on the corners of his eyes. Not today. While they waited for their food, Jane grew curious about something. Lance, you said that at first you did want to take Tiffany to the prom. Yeah. I did. Jane took a sip of her water and then continued. When did you change your mind? Lance's eyes bored through her. The day we talked, about my mom. I realized that you meant more to me than I had thought. And then after we danced, I had the strongest urge to kiss you. I thought you didn't like that kiss. You ran out of there so fast. He grinned. I liked it a bit too much. I think my feelings for you startled me. I had never thought of you that way before. You were always like a little sister to me. Yeah, I kind of got that feeling from you. She squirmed. Should she tell him? Before she had totally decided to come clean, the words were coming out of her mouth. I guess I should tell you, she fiddled with her silverware. I've had a crush on you since we were kids. Really? Lance seemed genuinely surprised. I didn't know. I kind of figured that when you asked me to help you get with Tiffany. He cringed. I'm sorry. I'm such an idiot. No, don't be sorry. Look how things worked out. I'm glad they did, he said. He took a sip of his water. Are you going to blog about tonight? You know about my blog? The corners of his lips twitched. Sure. I check it every day. Jane laughed. I was wondering who my one fan was. You have a real talent with words. A thrill of pleasure ran through her. Thanks. After dinner, they left for the school. When they got out of the limo, Nick whistled. Wow, you went all out, Lance. He came over and put his arm around Lance's shoulders. And I think you got the prettiest girl in the school. Jane felt her cheeks blush. Her? Pretty? You've been drinking, haven't you? He laughed. I just call it like I see it. He gave Lance a pat on the back and then waved. Have fun. Lance took her hand and walked her into the gym. Balloons and streamers covered the walls and ceiling. Loud music played over the speakers sitting on the stage. Would you like to dance? Yes. He pulled her close and moved to the music. His cologne mixed with the smell of his soap. She had an urge to ask him what soap he used, but decided that would be stupid. How did I ever have eyes for Tiffany? He rubbed her back with his thumb. She doesn't compare to you. A moment later, he was wearing her lipstick. The end. Thank you for listening to my story. If you want to read more of my work, check out my website at www.victorineliski.com.